We are live. Hello, welcome to those joining us. We're so glad to have you here. Hey everyone, welcome to those tuning in. We're just going to give it about 30 seconds for folks to settle in before we get started. Thanks for joining us. Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here. I see a lot of folks who were registered joining us, so we will go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here. I will kick it over to my colleague, Dr. Jessica Moorman, who is the Senior Director of Science and Policy for the Evangelical Environmental Network. Take it away, Jessica.
Thanks, Tori. And again, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We are just really thrilled to have two incredible speakers with us to share their knowledge and their insight in protecting Arctic landscapes. I'd like to start us off before jumping into our webinar today. If you could please join me in prayer. Holy and gracious God, we just thank you for this time to be together. We thank you that you are the Prince of Peace. And especially during the events of the last 24 hours, Lord, I just pray that your peace and your healing just cover all of us, all of our hearts in this nation, Lord. I pray that you bless this gathering. I pray that you bless the words of our speakers. I pray that you give us each ears to hear and hearts to receive, and your special insight in what you are calling us to do as your people in response. In your name, I pray and lift all these things up. Amen. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. As Tori said, my name is Dr. Jessica Moorman, Senior Director for Science and Policy here at EEN. If you aren't familiar with the Evangelical Environmental Network, we were founded in 1993, and our work is grounded in the Bible's teaching on our responsibility as God's people to be good stewards of all He has created. And here at EEN, our mission really is to help our fellow Christians rediscover and reclaim that biblical mandate to tend His garden and be good stewards. And so we are really thrilled to do a deep dive into what God is calling us into as it relates to protecting His creation, protecting all people who are made in His image, and specifically through looking at Arctic and Alaskan landscapes. We're focusing on protecting the Arctic today because it really is a part of God's creation that stands alone for both its beauty, its uniqueness, its irreplaceable wildlife and landscapes, as well as it is under threat from both climate change as well as unwise land use practices and decisions. It's also a physical, cultural, and spiritual home to tens of thousands of Indigenous Alaskans and First People groups. We're really thrilled to have as our speaker, one of our speakers today, Bernadette Demientieff, and hear from her. The Alaskan and Arctic landscapes are also ground zero for the impacts of global warming, which has profound impacts on the health and well-being, the way of life, not only for those living in the Arctic, but also has far-reaching impacts far beyond, and it impacts and touches the lives of everyone, each and every one of us where we live. Poor stewardship of that impacts all of us. So we're really honored to have two of our speakers here today with us to speak both to the local and global importance of protecting the Arctic, its implications for climate change, for conservation, and most importantly, for human rights and human dignity. And so our first speaker is Dr. Colleen Iversen. She is an ecosystem ecologist at Oak Ridge National Lab, and she uses a variety of field and laboratory techniques to understand and predict how ecosystems are shaped by environmental change. I know from personal experience that Dr. Iversen's work takes her all across to different landscapes, from upland forests to soggy peatlands to thawing Arctic tundra, and all in chasing a better understanding of the secret lives of roots and other ecosystems. She works at a small scale, both to answer a global question, which is how will ecosystems respond to the climate of the future? And then I also want to introduce our second speaker, Bernadette Demientieff. She is Executive Director of the Gwich'in Steering Committee. She is from Fort Yukon, Alaska, and as the executive director as the Gwich'in Steering Committee, it was founded in 1988 to represent the unified voice of the Gwich'in Nation, speaking to protect the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. Bernadette, she is a fierce defender of the Arctic Refuge-Coastal plain, of the Porcupine Caribou Herd, and the Gwich'in way of life. And she has said in her role as executive director, it has transformed her life to better serve her people. She's also a mother of 5 and a grandmother to 5 beautiful grandchildren. 6 now. Congratulations. Congratulations. So we are honored to have both Dr. Iversen and Bernadette here with us today. We'll hear from Dr. Iversen first, and then from Executive Director Demientieff. And then we'll have questions, group Q&A at the end of their presentations. And I want to direct you to the Q&A function to submit your questions. And so with that, I want to go ahead and hand it off to Dr. Iversen to speak to us about the global implications of protecting the Arctic.
Thanks so much. And thank you to Dr. Mormon and to Victoria for inviting me to speak. I was just lamenting as we were talking earlier that I am not able to see all of your faces. And I was saying that that is one of my favorite things about giving talks, is that I get to see the audience and get energy from them. But I will try to do my best today to share with you and imagine your smiling faces out there. So first, as Jessica mentioned, my name's Colleen, and I work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And if you want to find out more about my work in general, you can check out my website here or follow me on Twitter. But today I wanted to share with you the story of how we try to better understand the rapidly changing Arctic in order to better understand what the future might hold for our society. So as Jessica mentioned, I use a variety of tools and techniques to sort of understand the world around us. And that could be anything from using a shovel to dig a hole to more advanced techniques in imaging and stable isotopes. But the overarching goal that I have in my research is to better understand the interactions between plants and soils and what that means for how they will respond to a changing environment. And so as an ecologist, that kind of puts me at the nexus of a lot of different fields of work. And I actually sit in the Climate Change Science Institute at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I work with empiricists, observers like me, but also modelers who use math to understand and predict the world around us, and also database managers. And so all of us are using a lot of different ways to understand the world. And as ecologists, I think about how the energy choices that we make as a society affect plants and animals in ecosystems, and in turn, how those are impacted by changes in atmospheric greenhouse gases or soil characteristics or the water cycle, and also by climate change. And so that's one of the things that we're interested in studying. But today we were talking specifically about the Arctic. So as Jessica mentioned, I go to a lot of different places in the world to try to better understand it, because we really want to have sort of a global understanding, because changing environmental conditions are happening across the world. But as she mentioned, the Arctic is very special. And so I just wanted to step you through some of those things. So first, the Arctic is beautiful. And so here's a picture of one of the places that we work on the Seward Peninsula. It's on land that is owned by Mary's Igloo Native Corporation. And I just wanted to show you and sort of this part of the Arctic with the tall mountains and taller shrubs, that the view is just beautiful. So aside from the ecology that's happening, it's just a beautiful part of creation, interesting animals, and also sort of, you can see here, my colleague Verity in the sort of taller shrubs of the lower Arctic. And then if we move further north to the Arctic coastal plain, you won't see any trees or tall shrubs at all for as far as your eye can see. But you can see the influence of ground ice on the topography of the ground, on the geometry of it. And you can see sort of, if you look out, you might think for someone like me who's a plant ecologist, it might not be a very exciting place to work. But that's because the plants there are hugging the ground under these harsh environmental conditions. And if you look a little closer, you can see that all of these little plants have different strategies for survival. So even the same two kinds of plants can have different strategies for how far they dip their toes towards the cold permafrost, what their strategy is for living fast and dying young, or sort of slow and steady. So there's lots of interesting things to understand about the ecology of the Arctic. And also the Arctic is important, not just because it's an important cultural home for many, which is the most important thing. It's also an important component of the global carbon cycle. So permafrost, or permanently frozen soil, is a large reservoir of carbon, soil carbon. And in fact, there's twice as much carbon permanently frozen in the Arctic as there is currently in the atmosphere. And so understanding what might happen to that permanently frozen carbon as the world warms is something that's very important and interesting to study. And so I have a friend, Victor Leshik, at Arizona, who's an amazing artist, and he does a lot of these illustrations. And I think this one is a really nice illustration of why permafrost or frozen soil is such an important protector of carbon that could be potentially released to the atmosphere by the activity and decomposition of fungi and bacteria. So you can see an intact permafrost, these soils are permanently frozen and kept safe from microbes eating them and releasing CO2 and methane, carbon dioxide and methane to the atmosphere. But as intact permafrost thaws, it becomes either, it makes the depression in the landscape and becomes flooded, and the microbes don't work as hard to kind of eat the organic carbon that's there. But if it becomes thawed and drained, so not as wet, that means those bacteria and fungi have free access to chow down on that organic matter, that carbon, and they respire in the same way that we do. And so they respire that carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So the carbon that has been locked away and frozen for millennia is potentially now being released to the atmosphere as important greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. And that's because the Arctic is rapidly changing. So the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the global average. And so Jessica was mentioning it was sort of ground zero, or the canary in the coal mine. It's warming more rapidly than the rest of the world. And thawing permafrost is releasing these greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, but that thaw is also affecting infrastructure where people live. This warming is leading to declining snow cover, but it's also changing the timing of berry picking for people who live there. Another thing that's happening is the Arctic is greening, but only sometimes in some places. So you can see as these shrubs march across the Arctic into new places, they're affecting how much sunlight is reflected back to space. They're affecting the amount and distribution of that permanently frozen soil, but it's also affecting the food available for reindeer and other grazers. The Arctic is also burning. So wildfires are increasing in frequency, and they're changing the plant community composition, which affects the permafrost distribution, but also affecting air quality for folks that live there. And the way that we know about these changes is through measurements that are made from the tiniest microbe, which I just showed you a zoomed in image of, all the way up to a landscape level view of Earth from satellites that circle the world. And this information is published in scientific articles, but it's also summarized and brought together in freely available reports, like the Arctic Report Card that's released every year, National Academy's reports on specific topics, the National Climate Assessment, and also sort of in, news that spans the world. And this is important because what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. I think the first person I heard say this was Catherine Hayhoe, so I attributed it to her, but I thought it was a really kind of nice way to think about it. So even here in Tennessee, where I live at a much lower latitude than folks who live in Alaska, the news is filled with, a polar vortex and wobbling jet streams, and also the wildfires that we see across Alaska. And those fires are important because they're releasing what we call legacy carbon. So carbon that would have been locked away is now being released by the increased frequency of wildfires. And so for all of these reasons, understanding the role of the Arctic in our changing global climate is a national priority. And so everything's connected within the Arctic and across the world. And my work, which is supported by the Department of Energy and at a national laboratory, is focused on making these connections in virtual space. And so, as I mentioned, we use these mathematical models. I sometimes like to envision this is what it looks like when the modelers take my data and put it into a mathematical model, but it doesn't. It looks a lot like algorithms and equations. We use these models to put all the pieces together like a puzzle. So I study a very small thing, but putting all of those small things together in one big picture is what models are useful for. And they're also useful for projecting the future. So I can only measure one thing in one place right now under one circumstance, but these models can help us project what the world might look like in 50 or 100 years. And so models are built on this shared and interdisciplinary understanding. And that's from a community of scientists that collect data from across the Arctic and the world. And here's one community that I'm part of. So this is the community of the NG Arctic Project, which is a Department of Energy initiative spanning 4 national laboratories and the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where 100 or more scientists either sort of sit at our desk and use math to understand the world or fan out across these sites in Alaska to make measurements that the models need. So for example, I study what's hidden in the unseen world beneath our feet and how far plants dip their toes before they reach permafrost, but I have colleagues and collaborators who study things ranging from thawing permafrost to geomorphology, which is the shape of landscapes. So I just wanted to end by thanking the UIC Science Corporation in Utqiagvik, Alaska, the Council Native Corporation, Mary's Igloo Native Corporation, and the Sitnaussuk Native Corporation on the Seward Peninsula of Alaska for allowing us to conduct research on their land. And much of the work that I spoke about today is funded by the Biological and Environmental Research Program within the Department of Energy's Office of Science. And you can see here the sort of national laboratory and university partners that I mentioned. And I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview or a trip through why the Arctic matters so much to us.
Great. Thank you so much, Colleen, for giving us this big picture view. I now want to hand it over to Bernadette Demientieff, Executive Director for the Gwich'in Steering Committee, to give remarks and present on a more local view and why the Arctic and protecting its unique landscapes is so important.
Bernadette Demientieff Gwichyaa Zhee Gwich'in. My name is Bernadette Demientieff, and I am from Fort Yukon, Alaska, which is 8 miles above the Arctic Circle. I grew up there and in Venetie. For over 150 years, the Gwich'in people haven't gathered, and in 1988 was the first one, and they gathered because people were coming into our homelands telling us that we were going to be rich, we were going to have all this money. And Grandma Sarah explained that we are already rich. We are rich in our culture and our way of life. If we take care of the land will take care of us. And so the gathering happened in Arctic Village, where all the chiefs came together and they gave us 3 directions. And it was to go out and tell the world that we are here, to do the work in a good way, and do not compromise our position. Now that do it in a good way, it's a very simple sentence, but when you're up against corruption and misleading statements from our own leadership, it's hard, but we continue to work in a good way anyhow. We do come together every 2 years to reaffirm our commitment to protect the calving grounds. We have had a spiritual and cultural connection to the Porcupine Caribou Herd since time immemorial. There was a time we were able to communicate with them, and we made a vow to take care of each other. And therefore, if you look at the migratory route of the Porcupine Caribou Herd, which is on our website, and the Gwich'in communities, they're nearly identical. But because of climate change impacting our homes and our state so much, one or two communities get them now. So where I'm from, we have to go all the way to the border. And that is very dangerous, especially for that time of year. And we don't even know if they're gonna come through that way, because the changes that are happening up here is so mind-blowing. Even our elders are very concerned. We had our very first Arctic Indigenous Climate Summit last summer in Fort Yukon, Alaska. And our elders gathered and told us, enough with the gatherings, enough with the talkings, it's time to get active. Now, climate change, don't care what color we are, don't care if we're rich or if we're poor, we are all going to be negatively impacted. And with time we start, sticking our differences aside, we need to start coming together and working for our next generation, for our children. I have 6 grandchildren, and I'm concerned. I couldn't leave my house for 3 days because of the smoke. We have record-breaking fires, 33 coastal communities that are eroding into the ocean. We had thousands and thousands of dead fish in our rivers and our lakes. I actually have a picture of one of our fish right here. I do not know if it looked like they swam through acid. And then this was inside of another one. And so, this is our food security this is happening too. And we're not asking for anything. We're not asking for jobs, or we're not asking for oil development. We're simply asking to continue to live and thrive off the land that Creator blessed us with. This place is still untouched. It's the way Creator made it. And it hurts to know that right now we have pregnant caribou on their way. They are the last land mammals on the planet that travel this distance. And now, right now, as we are speaking, they are on their way to the calving grounds, where they will have up to 40,000 calves in a 2-week period. And I do not want them to go up to have 90,000-pound vehicles there, men, cigarette butts on the ground, trash. This is an area so sacred to the Gwich'in that we do not step foot there. This is like us bulldozing through somebody's church. That's what this place means to us. For thousands of years, we have protected this area. And and the other thing is this is not just an Inupiaq or a Gwich'in issue. There are many other Alaska tribes whose voices are being dismissed, whose voices are not being heard. Me, I just got a big mouth. I'm not afraid to use it for the right reasons. And like I serve on the Care of Creations Task Force, And we've also shared with them. And so, we've appreciated their support. But right now, they just sold our sacred land yesterday for $27 an acre. Our identity is not up for negotiation, and our culture and our way of life is not for sale. And I know that our elders directed us to do this in a good way, but we will not allow people to come into our homelands, make decisions about our future, and not involve us. We are no longer thawing 2 times the rate. We are thawing 3 times the rate as the rest of the world. I just found out. And that's concerning. We have, do you know what ticks are? Oh, so I didn't know what ticks are. We have them. They're nasty little critters. And I thought they were like tumors on one of our rabbits. And so the other really scary thing is we have seasonal hunters that know our land like the back of their hand, falling through the ice. And they're at a time when the ice should be frozen. They're drowning. We still never found one of them who was a very, we're losing a lot of our hunters. And that they are the people that teach the next generation how to hunt. And our elected leadership up here is not bringing any of this up. We are left to defend our homes, our animals on our own. They want more development, and they're putting profit before people. And I just want to share that we're real people. We have jobs, we have families, and we matter. Our ways of life matter. This last 4 years have been very, very difficult. I feel like we have been dismissed. When the Bureau of Land Management came to my hometown, we were honoring our traditional chief. And they told us 6 days prior that they were coming. And we told them, well, that's the day we're honoring our traditional chief. And they told us, well, we're coming anyway. So the people that actually needed to be in that meeting were not there. And we have had no respect whatsoever from this administration. And all of our concerns were not included in the final impact statement. And it's just, we're not giving up though. Giving up for us is not an option. We didn't come looking for a fight. This came to our front door. And we are very spiritual people. We do believe in the power of prayer. Just over the last 10 days, we gained 6 million supporters on an app called TikTok. That's something I just learned about. And they have wrote letters and posted about the Arctic Refuge. And these are young, younger generation. And they're more concerned about their future. And I think personally, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, then you need to be speaking up with them. Don't let them do it alone. They didn't create the problem. We have to stand with them. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I hope I spoke on what I was supposed to speak on. I really do care about what happens to my people, and what happens to the Porcupine Caribou Herd. Masicho.
Thank you so much for sharing just your deeply personal insight and how you are affected, how your children are affected, how the Gwich'in people are affected both by climate change as well as national policies like opening up the Arctic Refuge for drilling. And thank you so much. Also, I just want to just speak great honor to you for joining us today, a day after I know with the lease sale went up yesterday, and I just can't imagine how something like that may have felt of putting a price on sacred land that, as you said, is not meant to be touched. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We do have, I do want to open up the time for questions, but Bernadette, I was wondering if you could share more about your connection with and the Gwich'in people with the Porcupine Caribou Herd.
Sure. So our creation story tells us that there was a time we were able to communicate with them. And we made a vow to take care of each other. So that is why I wish I could show you the map, which I usually have hanging over there. We migrated alongside them. And when we had first contact and we were forced to settle, our ancestors settled us on the migratory route, like I said, but climate change has impacted Alaska so much that many communities no longer get the caribou. But the calving grounds, if you look at the map, if you go to our arcticrefuge.org, that's our website. There's a map on there. You'll always see that we will fall short from going into the coastal plain. That place is so sacred to us that even during times of food shortage and starvation, we still never went there. And they want to bring in 90,000-pound vehicles into our sacred land and blow 60,000 tons of force into the ground. Where there's a 52% chance they will run over denning polar bears and smaller animals. And at a time where we are selling 3 times the rate, where this area is more delicate than any other part of Alaska. And yeah, it's all our songs, stories, and dances are directed to the caribou. We do not worship them, but we hold them to high regards because it's been told to us that a piece of the caribou heart lies within our heart and a piece of our heart lies within the caribou. And I really truly feel that.
Thank you so much. And I want to reiterate a point that one of our attendees made, Wayne, of just noting that how everything is connected. And it's just so moving to hear about the connection between yourself, the Gwich'in people, and the caribou herd and the coastal plain. And just as Colleen was sharing of how connected the beautiful landscape that you live in, the beautiful Arctic landscapes, are connected with the rest of the world. I wanted to ask, well, first, I do want to say we have several questions from our attendees asking, how can we help? We're really moved by your story. We know that this is a critical time. I do want to point out that we will have an opportunity for everyone to act and respond, that we at EN will help host to be able to contact our elected representatives on this issue. But Bernadette, could you share more of what the Gwich'in Steering Committee is doing to address, especially protecting the Arctic refuge from these oil leases, and how we might be able to get involved.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, go to our Arctic Refuge. Right now, we are just asking our allies and supporters to write letters to Congress. We got new leadership in, write op-eds. And the people that bid, there's no, yesterday was a complete embarrassment I felt for the government on this issue, because they had 3 bidders, and I believe 3 bidders, and one of them is the Alaska Industrial AIDEA, and it's based in Anchorage. And we warned the people that would bid on the Arctic Refuge issues that they will have negative backlash, because that is what, even though we do things in a good way, we still hold people accountable. And the thing is, this is not an oil company. This Alaska Industrial Expert Association, or they're not an oil company. So we are finding that kind of a little bit funny, and I'd like an investigation into that. Another way that you can help is write to them. Share that they are the ones who bid on the Arctic Refuge. I think they offered 22 tracks, but only 11 were sold, and 7 was sold to these people. They do. I'm just sorry. I'm just emotional. It's just hard when you have 14 communities. People, some of them are worried, scared, mad, frustrated that we should even have to be fighting for our human rights in 2021. And just share on social media. But one is we need to update our new leaders down in Congress. And that's going to be the first thing we do as soon as we're clear to travel. We have a new youth council. That's our next generation of leaders, because I feel as long as there's resources up there, it's always going to be an issue. And we were raised to protect this place. This is not just a job for us. We don't go home and turn it off at 5 o'clock. It's always on our mind. It's always, we're always thinking of ways of what we can do to protect our people.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to lift up a question from Caben. Caben asks, notes that he lives in San Antonio, Texas, and asks about speaking to the average San Antonio. What would you say to persuade them that they should care about the Arctic? I think, Bernadette, you have given such an incredible story, your personal story, the story of your people, that is so moving, that is persuasion enough. I wanted to invite Colleen to also give reflections on speaking to the average person in the lower 48 of why to care about the Arctic.
Sure. And I think, the answer that we as humans should care about other humans should be the end of the story. But I can give a science answer to that too. And I think it comes back to the question of connections, right? So if the Arctic is changing twice as fast or 3 times as fast or 4 times as fast as the rest of the world, and it's releasing greenhouse gases to the atmosphere rapidly, global warming is a global problem. And so that means that what is happening very rapidly in the Arctic means warmer temperatures, changing rainfall and snowfall patterns for the rest of the world. And that's related to wildfire as well. And also this sort of the polar vortex, that's happening because we're losing that temperature differential between the tropics and the Arctic. And so this jet stream is allowed to wobble more than it used to. And so the freezing air doesn't stay in the Arctic anymore. It's coming down to, different places in the United States and in Europe. Sometimes that means freezing, like these polar vortexes. Sometimes it means things are a lot hotter than they're meant to be, changing snowfall patterns. And so it really is a global problem, but it's happening very fast in the Arctic. And so that's why we should really care.
And also that, birds from all the states and from 7 different continents travel all the way to the coastal plain where they are nesting, and their droppings, it helps the food grow for the animals that are there. And the caribou, it's very crucial for the mother and calf at that exact time of year to have that nutrients. And mosquitoes can also kill a newborn calf, so the wind from the ocean helps with that. February is supposed to be our coldest month of the year, and it was raining a couple of years ago. It was 77 above and raining. That's not normal.
Thank you. And I'd love to hear first, Bernadette, from you of more stories. David O'Hara asks, what are some stories you'd like? He teaches in South Dakota, and we know the power of storytelling, of lifting up other people's stories. What are some other stories you'd like to, that we can share with others? Of the Gwich'in people in general, or other things you would like us to know?
Well, I wish I had my map. So, the Porcupine Caribou Herd is still healthy in numbers. They still are healthy. Now, the herds that are in the developed areas, even though they say otherwise, they have all declined. The central herd has declined 57% since 2010. So you can't tell me that my food security is not going to be impacted, not when we see different. We have a lot of allies that live up in those areas. And one of the ladies was a nurse 20 years ago, and she said that there is only one person in the village that had asthma. Now, a third of their community has asthma or respiratory lung infections. There's just a lot of stories up here that are not shared. And there's some tribes that are afraid to speak out because of retaliation. The Gwich'in, we stand united to protect the calving grounds. To us, we call it Ejik Gondai, the sacred place where life begins. And we have prophecies, and our elders tell us things that are going to happen, and then when you see them happening, you're like, oh my, how do they know? But they told us to always stand strong and that they're with us. And I truly believe that. I am a very strong believer in the power of prayer, and I believe that we are going to protect the calving grounds.
Thank you. This is a question from Cameron Smith for Colleen, of asking, do you have any basic predictions based on science on what is going to happen next with the tundra, or perhaps give us a timeline on what to expect over the next 10 to 20 years?
Sure. And I should say that these predictions come from sort of all of the information that we put into these mathematical models that help us to predict what the future holds. And it's our job as scientists to make sure we have the right bits of information in there to make these predictions. And they give us basically a range of different scenarios. So it depends. It depends on decisions that we as a society make. And it depends on sort of which way an ecosystem will fall into the future. So some of the predictions are longer growing seasons. So warming means earlier spring, later fall, which affects a lot of the sort of the animal and plant survival and sort of responses to those. In some cases, it will be drier. In some cases, it will be wetter and greener. They also predict more wildfire frequency, more insect outbreaks. And so in some places where we're seeing these taller, greener shrubs march across the tundra, that's sort of a greener Arctic. But in other cases, those shrubs are then sort of decimated by insect outbreaks. And so that's browner. And so it's sort of a range of different scenarios, but all warmer and all with less permafrost, less permanently frozen soil.
Thanks. And Larry would like to know, are the plants blooming earlier? And I'd love to get both of your take, Colleen, from your work studying the ecosystems, as well as Bernadette, your lived experience. Both are plants blooming earlier, and has there been any noticeable impact on the migratory birds and nesting cycles?
Well, we had birds literally falling out of the sky dead from starvation. The scientists have told us. And I work with Bree Van Dam. She's a scientist at the UAF. We actually just released the first Arctic Indigenous Climate Summit report. It's on our website. That's all traditional, our indigenous knowledge from our first-hand hunters and the people that witness changes. For instance, where I came from, the Yukon River, it's just straight river. I came home 3 years later, and there was a big island in the middle of our, like, I was like, where'd that come from? They were like, it just appeared. You know, there's a lot of, I've never seen anything like this. I just, but one thing I know this about the blueberries. You know, usually we would pick berries, and we would keep them in the fridge overnight, and then we would clean them. I don't know what happened, but we only left them in there one night, and the next day they were just like they weren't good. They just like melted or something. It was very strange. And then we also are seeing rose hips, blueberries, raspberries, all growing in one area together. They're usually not, they're usually in different parts, you know, and that's kind of like not normal.
And I would say too, it depends on sort of an interaction with snow, right? And so if, in some cases, if you end up with more tall shrubs, you end up with more snow, which can mean a later sort of growing season for those plants. But in some cases, if you end up with less snow, that means that the plants could be exposed to more freezing, which isn't necessarily good either. And so the Arctic is special because there's so many different things to consider: the frozen ground, the amount of snow, where you are on the sort of hill slope face. And so that's why we end up with this sort of range of, it depends on where you are and kind of, and the important processes that are happening there.
Yeah, and the
Thank-
sinkholes,
Mhm.
we're having like sinkholes and like 15 feet just dropping off of the island of Eek, I think it was. It's unbelievable.
Thank you. And I also want to thank all of our attendees and participants, all the audience questions. I've had a hard time keeping up. You've asked so many great questions. But I do want to end with this last question that comes from a couple of you, and one that Tori and I had ourselves was, we'd love to end with hearing about, we've heard much about the threats and what's happening, the impacts and the changes that are happening in your home, Bernadette, in the Arctic in general. We'd love to hear what gives you hope with continuing your important but challenging work, both in advocacy for you, Bernadette, with science for you, Colleen. What from your work really gives you hope for moving forward that we can take on ourselves as well? I would love to start with you, Bernadette. Let's see, and I think you might be frozen. So Colleen, would you share with us what gives you hope?
Oh, she's back.
I just totally went gone for a minute. I don't know what happened.
Great, you're back.
I don't know what happened. You were just talking, and then you'll have to repeat your question.
Sure. So essentially, just what gives you hope with your challenging work, and something to give hope for continuing this work that you can share with the audience.
Well, what gives me hope is we have a very smart generation coming up. We just got to stand with them. We can't leave them to do this work alone. Guide them, support them. And what gives me hope is unity. Not just unity amongst the Indigenous people, but unity amongst all of us. Because like I said, climate change, don't care what color you are, if you're rich or poor, black, white, red or brown, we are all going to be negatively impacted. We can't stop climate change, but we can start preparing our future generations to, and we can start making changes to slow it down. But we need the right people in the office to do that. Not everything is about money. I mean, I like money, believe me, I like money, but not if it's going to negatively impact, people's ways of life and hurt our animals. It's not worth it.
I think for me, what gives me hope is the conversations. So talking about it, understanding the importance. And I agree. I think the next generation has such a good understanding of how important science is and how important the natural world is in thinking about our future. And I also think the conversations about how important Indigenous knowledge is, and also how it can stand beside Western science as a different way of knowing, but more important or equally important to understanding the world around us. And so making sure that we have the conversations, because really it's about shaping the future that we want for our children and for our society. And so I think talking about it like we're doing here is a great first step, and I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. And on Indigenous knowledge, we do have in the chat the link to the Arctic Indigenous Climate Summit report that Bernadette mentioned, as well as some more information on yesterday's land lease and sale for oil exploration in the Arctic Refuge. And we always want to leave our audience and participants with a way to respond. And so I want to turn it over to Tori, our communications director at EEN, to share more about how we can respond to what we've heard from Colleen and Bernadette.
First, thank you, Bernadette and Dr. Iversen, for joining us today. It is just an honor to hear from you both, and we're so thankful for your perspectives and taking the time to share with us. At EEN, we oppose drilling, exploration, any exploitation of the Arctic Refuge because it is impacting God's creation and is hurting our neighbors, including Bernadette, who's on our webinar. And so we have a campaign now. Currently, we have a petition campaign going to contact the Department of the Interior, as well as members of Congress. And so far, over 25,000 pro-life Christians have taken part in this. And they have in the past too, in 2018 with the tax bill. And so I put a link to our latest action alert in the chat. You can head there and it's a pre-written message. You can edit it as you see fit, but it lets your member of Congress know that you as a part of EEN as a Christian care about this issue and want to see the refuge protected. And so you can check out the action alert, and there will be background information to learn more about what we talked about today, as well as send those messages to members of Congress. And like Bernadette said, share it on social media. Don't just send the message yourself, but then pass it along to your other friends, other people in your networks to help let them know what's going on. And we will be recording, this webinar is recorded, and we'll be sharing it. And so please just help us continue to get the message out.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori. And I know we are a little bit over time. So I just hope that I just want to thank all of our participants for your incredible questions. Thank you for being here. And please join me in virtually thanking our speakers, Dr. Colleen Iversen and Bernadette Demientieff. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, sharing your experience, sharing your wisdom with us today. We are truly honored and blessed by that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks. And with that, I just want to wish everyone a very blessed afternoon, and peace be with you.